Good morning, English 3. Welcome back to our discussion of Dante's Inferno. We're moving on to Canto 31. Almost at the end. Just hang in there a few more days and we'll be done with it. No, I'm sure you're all enjoying the book very much. So Canto 31 here, we're going to be moving into the very lowest portion of hell, the ninth circle finally, Cocytus. And if you look in your book on page 352, you'll see a map there and a diagram. I won't bother drawing one because that one's got all the information that you need. So here, this lowest circle of hell that we're now going to be moving into, Cocytus. Notice the ninth level of hell. Remember, these numbers always have meaning for Dante. We've got 9 subdivisions of hell, 3 larger sections to it, right? We had the sins of the wolf, the lion, and now the leopard. And so here we're moving to the very bottom, and a lot of the themes here in terms of numbers, in terms of some of the mythological and historical things that have been coming up are going to come to their fulfillment or completion here in this canto. So first, just a general overview of the structure of this lowest circle of hell. Cocytus, and the sins that are punished here are all classified as fraud complex. So we saw in Circle 8, the Male Bolge, the first portion of the lowest section of hell was fraud simple, meaning types of deception and betrayal that are not complicated by, shall we say, aggravating factors. Each of the types of fraud punished here in this lowest circle of hell, there's something about them that makes them particularly bad. And so there are 4 sections to Cocytus, each one of which has a name after a person who's associated with this particular type of fraud, and with different characteristic aspects to it. So first up is Caina, for sins of betrayal or fraud against family members, as in Cain and Abel. Then we have Antenora, sins against betrayal against the country, or your political loyalties. Ptolemia then against guests. And remember when we read the Odyssey earlier in the year, this theme of hospitality to guests was extremely important. You can probably imagine where Dante would have put those suitors after Odysseus and Telemachus take care of them. And the lowest section of hell, the very bottom, sins of betrayal against lords. The order here might be a little surprising to you. We don't think of society in quite the same way that Dante did. We might think of families, betrayal against your family as being the worst. But for Dante, living in the much more hierarchical and class-based society, we might say, that he lived in, sins against the Lord, that would be the absolute worst. Why? Because unlike family or guests or country, where there's just sort of a natural affection and affinity there, your lord or your master, especially if you're talking about in a free relationship rather than a master-slave relationship, is someone whom you've made a conscious decision to not only support but also to obey, to follow. And so these sins here are an inversion of that whole relationship. It's not an equal that you've sinned against, not someone below you that you sinned against, but actually someone above you, which makes it even worse. And of course, that's the nature of sin in general, that sin is an offense against God, against the Lord, capital L. And so we see that their sin, the very lowest sin here, is a sort of, we could say that ultimately all sin falls into that, but this just in the purest way. Okay, so this low section of hell, Cocytus, we're going to see more about it in the next 3 cantos, the last 3 cantos. Here in Canto 31, we just have different types of simple fraud being punished there. And finally, they get to the end of there, and there's this sound of a horn off in the distance. And they can't see very well, and Dante sees some shapes off in the distance. And he says to Virgil, here, this is starting from line 21, "Master," I said, "what city lies ahead?" Virgil responds, "Because you tried to penetrate the shadows," he said to me, "from much too far away, you confuse the truth with your imagination. You will see clearly when you reach that place how much the eyes may be deceived by distance. And so just push ahead a little more. Then lovingly, he took me by the hand and said, but now, before we go on further, to prepare you for the truth that could seem strange, I tell you those aren't towers, they are giants. They're standing in the well around the bank, all of them hidden from their navels down. So we see here again, remember when we transitioned from the top level of hell, the sins of the wolf, to the sins of the lion, moving into violence, how there was the city there, the walls of the city of Dis, that temporarily prevented Dante and Virgil from moving on. Here again, we have the image of a city used as a division here. This time, though, instead of the city having actual walls, the towers are living towers made of these giants. We'll talk more about them in a second. And so remember, Dante is coming from this world where the life of the city, Florence for him, is so important, that then this perversion, both in terms of the city of Dis and then here also with the giants, this perversion of the idea of city. Think of Augustine's City of God, where he uses this image of city to describe the kingdom of God, is turned on its head. All right, so he approaches these giants. Now, who are the giants? Again, this is another figure not from the scriptures really, and not so much from the real world, obviously, as it is another figure from classical Greek and Roman myth. And the giants in Greek and Roman myth, these are one of these earlier generations of deities who rebelled against the Olympian gods and were thrown into Tartarus or hell for doing this. And so here, these giants, these mythological figures, we've been seeing mythological figures in almost every section of hell so far. Dante is combining the Christian tradition and the classical tradition here in this work. And so the giants here, what are they being punished for? Well, for rebelling against the gods, not God, the God, but the classical gods. So still, they have that element of rebellion against their lords, which is the most important sin that's being punished here. So they are in an appropriate section of hell, and we see them here as, like a lot of these other mythological figures, they act as sort of guards, but also ways that Dante is going to be able to get either advice or assistance. So there are three giants that Dante and Virgil encounter. The first one is Nimrod. The horn blast that they hear at the very beginning of the canto turns out was this giant Nimrod blowing on his horn. And Nimrod, when they approach him, he speaks. And what he says is, Rafal mai amech sabi almi. It's nonsense. Nimrod is associated here, and again, a sort of combination of the classical and the Christian tradition, is associated with that story from Genesis of the Tower of Babel, that it was partially his idea, and he helped out with the building of this tower, which ended up leading to God punishing mankind by dividing them by language. So Nimrod, part of his punishment appropriately, is he speaks this ugly nonsense. Next, they're going to come to Ephialtes, another one of the giants who rebelled against the Greek gods, and he's chained there, like most of the other giants. The last one that they come to, Antaeus, interestingly, is not chained, and he's able to speak to them. So he still has some use of his reason. Remember, way back at the beginning of the Inferno, there was that reference to the souls who lost the good of reason, talking about the souls in hell. Nimrod is not as punished as these other giants. He's not tied up, and he still has some use of reason, as we can tell from his ability to speak. And why? Well, it turns out that Antaeus, when the giants rebelled against the gods, he sort of stayed on the fence. He didn't really join the rebellion, but he also didn't join the gods in trying to put down the rebellion. Again, another theme that we saw way back in the very beginning. Who are the first people that we see in hell? They're not even quite in hell, in that vestibule there. They are still being punished, though, for that failure. So Antaeus here, Dante and Virgil are able to speak to him. And Antaeus here is going to play an important role. Just like some of the other mythological figures that we saw, they are going to enable Dante to progress. And the problem here, moving from Circle 8 to Circle 9, just like we saw moving from Circle 7, the Burning Sands, to Circle 8, the Male Bolge, is that there's a big cliff. There's a huge drop-off. And Virgil, being a dead soul, could easily jump down and it wouldn't hurt him at all. But Dante is still alive, and so he needs to be more careful. So just as with the with descending down from the Male Bolge into from the Burning Sands into the Male Bolge, how Geryon had given Dante and Virgil a ride on his back, this monster symbolizing fraud, symbolizing deception, had given them a ride down. Similarly here, Antaeus, this giant who's still able to move, is going to carry Virgil and Dante down onto the surface of the frozen lake that makes up Cocytus. So again, another theme we see there, that Antaeus is here as sort of a guardian for the Circle of Hell, but he's also going to be Dante's way of moving forward. Maybe we could also think of this as another kind of betrayal. If it really is his job to be keeping people out of this section of hell, all the giants are facing outwards, we might be able to think of it as a sort of betrayal of that also, his bringing Dante and Virgil down. But ultimately, even with this disobedience on Antaeus's part, Dante and Virgil are on a mission from God, and to quote the Blues Brothers, and so it is all going to work out towards their benefit in the end. All right, so I posted the questions on Jupiter grades. Please answer those. Make sure you look at the notes when you read this canto, and I'll talk to you guys soon.